There are over 8 million Jehovah's Witnesses around the world. To be a follower of Jehovah involves a total belief in an ancient and literal interpretation of the scriptures. The Bible is not just for worship, it dictates day-to-day life for all its members. And because of one particular rule, the organisation has been accused of covering up thousands of cases of child sex abuse around the world. I'm David Cook, and in this edition of Heart and Soul for the BBC World Service, I'm trying to understand why obscure passages of the Bible are still being used by church elders, effectively protecting sexual abusers.
When I was around about 6 or 7 years of age, my mother became a Jehovah's Witness. As a consequence of that, I was brought along in the same belief system. Not long after my mum became a Jehovah's Witness, she was a single parent by then, she met a male Jehovah's Witness who she subsequently married, but it turns out that he was a paedophile. And even before they got married, he started to groom me, and I underwent physical, mental and sexual abuse for a period of about 5 years.
This is Nick French. He now lives outside Glasgow on the west of Scotland. He says he was unable to tell anyone at his non-religious school about the abuse he was suffering because of the religion's strict teachings about the dangers of the outside world.
Anything outside the world of Jehovah's Witnesses is an evil place. You would go to school because the state says that you're to go to school. You certainly wouldn't be involved in anything out with the group because it's under the control of Satan the devil. And you would just limit any association with people outside of the organisation.
There are Jehovah's Witnesses in over 200 countries around the world. The largest number are in America, where the Watchtower, the organisation's headquarters, is based. It's home to the governing body, 7 men who believe that they are anointed by Jehovah and are guardians of the doctrine. Each local congregation is overseen by another group of men known as elders. They lead services, Bible study, and attend to the pastoral care of the congregation.
My grandparents on my mom's side were actually born and raised Jehovah's Witnesses, and so my mom was Jehovah's Witness, and then my dad was actually a Catholic, and when they got married, my mom took him to studies, Bible studies, and so now he's a Jehovah's Witness.
Candace Conte is from California. Growing up as a Jehovah's Witness, she wasn't allowed to celebrate Christmas because of its association with pagan customs. She was told that birthday parties displeased God and evolution was a myth.
I always wondered about dinosaurs. I always wondered where the dinosaurs came from. The dinosaurs aren't in the Bible. And I asked the elders, where are the dinosaurs? What happened to the dinosaurs? Dinosaurs didn't exist. Well, but we have fossils. We have all these things, that say, what about evolution? I was going into that. That's going into the evolutionary side of things, and they don't believe in evolution.
I met Candace at an international conference in London, where people had gathered to share their experiences of dealing with sexual abuse in the organisation. She told me about her abuser.
He had a way of being very forceful and seemed to take a really big liking to the kids in the congregation. And he ended up molesting me over a course of a couple of years. And, I think at that point in time, I was too afraid to really say anything. There was a lot of turmoil in my own family. And I was scared.
To try and understand more about some of the beliefs that the Jehovah's Witnesses follow, I've come to Hamilton, just outside Glasgow in the west of Scotland, to meet someone who can help.
We are now approaching Hamilton Central. Please mind the gap when alighting from this train.
Hey, how you doing?
Hello.
Great
nice
to see you.
To meet you.
Likewise, how's things?
Good, thank you.
The journey was okay?
Yeah, not bad.
Well, we're now in the grounds of Hamilton Old Parish Church of Scotland.
You're the Reverend Ross Blackman.
That's correct, yes. I'm the minister here for this parish and of this church.
But you used to be a Jehovah's Witness.
Yes, that's right. Yes, with quite a long and interesting, varied career. But yes, that's right. I grew up as a Jehovah's Witness, 3rd generation. My father was one of those that went across to some of the conventions in the USA in the 50s and all my extended family pretty much are Jehovah's Witnesses as well.
Well, let's go inside the church. You can tell me a little bit more about it.
Yes. Their main core beliefs are that they do believe in Scripture. They believe it's the Word of God. They believe that there's only one God, so they're monotheistic. They believe quite strictly that that is a God whose name is Jehovah, the God of the Old Testament and the New. And where they then start to maybe diverge slightly from mainstream Christianity is that rather than accepting Jesus as also being God, the Son of God, they'll accept him as the Son of God only in so much as he's a creation. They're also quite isolationist in so much as they would view themselves as being no part of the world, so they take no part in politics, whilst at the same time, usually, they would try to uphold local law and are generally known as being honest, law-abiding, clean, living individuals.
Together, Jehovah our God, accepting your warm invitation.
The Jehovah's Witnesses was founded at the end of the 19th century in the United States by a small group of Bible students led by Charles Taze Russell. He was said to be disillusioned by mainstream Christianity and argued that it had strayed from the first century vision described in the Bible. The Bethel is the world headquarters of the Jehovah's Witnesses in New York State, and it supervises 90 branches worldwide, distributing Bible study materials and online sermons like this.
We go out and we preach. We tell them about what Matthew 24 says and Mark 13 and Luke 21 and 2 Timothy 3, that we're living in the time of the end.
Jehovah's Witnesses believe that Armageddon, the end of the world, is coming, that the Bible instructs them to abstain from blood, which rules out accepting transfusions, and that followers must live by strict moral code. I've travelled to Barry in South Wales and I'm here to meet John Viney. John was a member of the Jehovah's Witnesses for over 50 years, and for much of that time he was also an elder, a pastoral leader in the congregation. John, David from BBC World Service. Good
Hello,
to meet
David.
you.
Nice to see you.
Where are we?
Where are we? We are on a nice sunny day. We're standing outside the Kingdom Hall of Jehovah's Witnesses in the area of Barry called Gibbonsdown, and this is the main Kingdom Hall for this area.
There's a high metal fence all around it, but for many, many years you would be on the other side of that fence worshipping in that Kingdom Hall.
Yes, I was very much involved in the Barry congregation as an elder.
Tell me, what would happen if you walked into that Kingdom Hall today?
I think, on the whole, I would be viewed with great suspicion. At the moment, I have many Jehovah's Witnesses that would walk past me. We would call it shunning.
Why? Why would they need to be careful of you?
Well, only because I have been known now to speak out against some of the practices and some of the ways in which Jehovah's Witnesses handle certain affairs. Being specific, I'm talking about child abuse. I was affected very, very deeply because my own daughter, Karen, was abused by an elder here in this very Kingdom Hall. And it's left its mark both emotionally and spiritually on me and my family.
What happened in there? What happened to Karen?
Well, her uncle, my brother-in-law, took advantage of her, really, and from the age of about 12 or 13 up until she was about 15, some bad things went on, physically abusing her in a few ways, and the matter was reported to the police. We did. The Jehovah's Witnesses didn't report the matter to the police. 2 elders had to meet with Karen and myself, and we also had to meet with her abuser. And in a room in this Kingdom Hall where we're standing now, the abuser said, "No, I didn't do that. His wife said, no, he didn't do that, because she was there. And Karen had to say in front of the two elders, this is what he did to me. And at the end of that meeting, the two elders report back to the whole body of elders, and they have to decide if there's a case to answer. That did take place, and it was decided that since it was only Karen's word against his, and Jehovah's Witnesses require 2 witnesses to any sin, then no action could be taken.
The 2-witness rule meant no action was taken against Karen's abuser for many years. Ross Blackman, the ex-Jehovah's Witness, who is now a Church of Scotland minister, told me where this belief comes from.
The Jehovah's Witnesses try to root their beliefs in Scripture. And unlike most denominations, they'll pick on certain verses and lay them with higher order than others, perhaps. And this is perhaps one good example of that. I mean, the 2-witness rule you do find in Old Testament. You find it in the book of Deuteronomy in a couple of different chapters. The first example, Deuteronomy 17, talks about, in the case of the death penalty, actually, that they wouldn't give the death penalty to someone where there wasn't 2 witnesses. And you can perhaps understand why that might be a prudent way of going on. But other places as well, in the epistles, in Corinthians and in Timothy, there are examples of 2 witnesses being expected to prove certain behaviours, especially if someone in authority, an elder in the congregation, were being accused of something, where you would want to have 2 witnesses of a kind of behaviour.
The Watchtower, the headquarters of the Jehovah's Witnesses in the UK, declined to be interviewed for this programme, but they did send me a statement. It says that they abhor child abuse and they view it as a heinous crime and a sin. Congregation elders do not shield abusers from the authorities or from the consequences of their actions. I'm David Cook, and for Heart and Soul from the BBC World Service, I'm on my way to meet a lawyer in London who believes the Jehovah's Witnesses have a crisis that's on a par with the abuse allegations that have hit the Catholic Church.
Certainly the numbers of Jehovah's Witnesses worldwide are not as great as the number of Catholics. However, when you look at the level of cover-up and the steps and lengths that the Jehovah's Witnesses are willing to go to try and avoid disclosing documents, then I think that this is a scandal on that level.
Kathleen Hallisey is a senior solicitor with the law firm Bolt, Bird & Kemp. In 2015, she represented a survivor of sexual abuse in the UK's first civil case brought against the Jehovah's Witnesses.
We know that reports are made to the Watchtower here in the UK, and that's true around the world. And a record is kept of that report of abuse or alleged abuse, but those documents are never turned over to authorities.
When they find or they're made aware of an allegation of child sexual abuse, how is that process managed? What do we know about it?
If there's an allegation of child sexual abuse made to the elders of the congregation, we know that the first thing that they're directed to do is to contact the Watchtower headquarters here in London to be given direction by the legal department as to what steps to take. And they then may, depending on the advice that they receive, be directed to investigate the allegation. The concern with investigating the allegation is that this is where the 2-witness rule is implicated. So if there aren't 2 witnesses to the abuse, then the investigation goes no further. And it's a grave concern that there are hardly ever 2 witnesses to abuse, as we all know. And if that's a requirement for there to be an investigation and there's no report to the authorities about the allegation of abuse, then not only are children continuing to be abused, but the perpetrator is still out there able to reoffend.
The Jehovah's Witnesses have been accused of failing to address recommendations from the Child Abuse Royal Commission, a year and a half after a damning public hearing.
Last year in Australia, a Royal Commission into child sex abuse released a critical report into the Jehovah's Witnesses, and it was particularly scathing about the 2-witness rule.
The Commission found that this rule was devised more than 2,000 years ago and was still applied inflexibly even in the context of child sexual abuse. There were a range of other
The report said the absolute commitment to the 2-witness rule as God's word showed the Jehovah's Witnesses had a serious lack of understanding of the nature of child sexual abuse, and their weak disciplinary system left perpetrators at large in the organisation and the community. When the Australian Royal Commission analysed the Jehovah's Witnesses case files, they discovered evidence of 1,800 alleged victims of child sex abuse since the 1950s. There were also over 1,000 alleged abusers listed in the files. Not one case, it concluded, had been reported to the police.
I have an order of protection from the Superior Court of San Diego of California instructing that I can't talk about what I've got. I can tell you that I have 4 years' worth of records that relate to known sexual abusers within the Jehovah's Witnesses who were in positions of authority.
Lawyer Erwin Zolkin has also managed to get access to thousands of documents detailing abuse allegations. A court order means he can't talk to me about the files, but he says they shine a light on the organisation's policy to not report serious crimes to the police.
Jehovah's Witnesses from birth, or from whenever they become Jehovah's Witnesses, are so indoctrinated to believe that they cannot trust the outside world. The outside world has been corrupted by Satan. So when they have a circumstance like abuse, they go to their elders. Who else would you go to but the righteous elders? And the elders will say to them, listen, needs to be kept within the congregation. We don't want to bring reproach against Jehovah. You're not going to get Jehovah's Witnesses going to law enforcement and reporting.
In a statement, the Jehovah's Witnesses in the UK told me that they are committed to doing all they can to prevent child abuse and to provide spiritual comfort to any who have suffered from this terrible sin and crime. The victim and his or her parents have the absolute right to report the matter to the governmental authorities, and whether the victim or parents decide to report the matter is not contingent on the number of witnesses.
Now, Karen is remarkably philosophical about it. Yes, she's very angry about what happened to her.
I'm now heading over to Swansea in South Wales with John Viney, and we're going to meet his daughter Karen, who was abused by an elder over 20 years ago. Her abuser was recently convicted.
Nobody from the Jehovah's Witnesses told me to go to the police or advised me to. I knew I wanted to do it. And even when I had said to my dad that I wanted to do it, my dad still felt like he needed to contact the Jehovah's Witnesses to find out whether we were allowed to or not. They don't encourage you to do it by any means, and none of them came with me. None of them would be supportive.
And how long did it take before action was finally taken against the guy who abused you?
I think it was roughly about 28 years later when eventually I went to the police for a second time, and this time, when he was arrested, more victims came forward, so it ended up going to court this time, and he was convicted.
How long for?
14 years.
Let me show you something, Karen. This is a document that was published in January of this year, 2017, and it's the child safeguarding policy of Jehovah's Witnesses in the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland. Is this something that you've seen before?
No, I don't think I have seen this, actually.
In it, there's a number of statements about their policies and the definition of child abuse and the action that they will take, and it says that they abhor abuse of children. They're saying that people can go to the police. Do you think this represents a change of policy within the Jehovah's Witnesses?
I wouldn't trust any document from them simply for the reason being that they still maintain the two-witness rule. So if they suddenly were to say, OK, we appreciate that there aren't going to be two witnesses to sexual abuse and we're going to put that in a document, then I might be inclined to think, wow, this is, they're really starting to understand it.
According to the Jehovah's Witnesses' current child safeguarding policy, when an allegation of abuse is made, elders are instructed to call the Bethel, the organisation's headquarters, and ask to speak to the legal department for advice. The policy says that people shouldn't be discouraged from reporting abuse to the authorities, yet there is no direct instruction to do so. One section says people may choose to report the matter. In some countries, such as the UK, this isn't illegal. There's currently no legislation here for the mandatory reporting of allegations of child sex abuse.
I was treated just the same as any disfellowshipped person, and so I became a pariah in the eyes of the community, really. And subsequently, all of my prior friends, which is a lifetime of friends, had nothing to do with me. And at that particular time, pretty much all my family as well, because all my extended family were Jehovah's Witnesses also.
Back in Scotland, Ross Blackman is telling me what happened when he decided to leave the Jehovah's Witnesses after he started to doubt the theology of the organisation.
Because you wanted to leave, that meant everyone that you had associated with, family, friends, other members of the congregation, didn't want to have anything to do with you?
That's exactly the case, yes, exactly the case. And as you can probably imagine from a social perspective, even that's very, very difficult. It's something that's very difficult to bear. Even though I'd anticipated that that would be the way I would be treated, to actually come face to face with that kind of treatment is a real shock to the system. There's no shadow of a doubt about that. It does affect you quite deeply.
You're looking a little upset, if you don't mind me saying. Just the memory of it is still pretty upsetting.
Yes, I mean, here we are 15 years later, and talking about that particular facet of life is deeply hurting and hurtful. I don't suppose there's any way it could be otherwise, really. To have that sense of loss, that amount of loss, is a bereavement, a huge bereavement of a tragic scale for an individual.
Where are we now, Ross?
Yes, we're now still in Hamilton, the other end of the town this time, though, and we're going to visit a friend of mine, Nick French. Hi, Nick. How you doing?
I'm not bad, thanks.
Nick and Ross are two of the people who run an online support group for people in the UK who have left the Jehovah's Witnesses.
We have around about 600 members, and it's a very active group. There are people that are posting almost on an hourly basis, whether they're offering support or giving support, and it really does operate 24 hours a day.
Just give us an idea of the type of issues people are dealing with.
Well, some of the issues will be to do with the fact that people are finding it difficult with the shunning aspect. There will be other people who are finding that they need support because of being survivors of child sexual abuse. Or it could be that people are maybe asking about different doctrinal issues. Maybe if there's a thunderstorm, a lot of people will come online, and because it's brought back memories of being told that Armageddon is near.
Just explain that to me. A thunderstorm can be upsetting to people who are ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. Ross, you're nodding.
A leaflet that I'm sure Nick will remember from the 80s, which had the word Armageddon emblazoned over it and lightning strikes all over it. And we were raised with that. And this idea of an impending doom was very much part and parcel of what we were raised with. And we would have seen images like that every week of life.
The Jehovah's Witnesses say anyone has the right to leave the organisation, but it does mean that your family and friends will not be allowed to associate with you. This happened to Nick after his stepdad was sent to prison for abusing him, and Nick decided to cut his ties with the church.
The family that I have that are Jehovah's Witnesses, I have no relationship with at all.
And how did they convey that was going to happen to you?
I had an email from my mum when she found out that I was no longer a Jehovah's Witness to say that this would be the last communication that we have. And I do not have any more communication from her.
Did she feel any sorrow or any regret about the abuse that you experienced?
She did, thankfully, and she was a witness in the case against my abuser. However, since the case, I have had no contact from her.
It sounds particularly cruel that when people need that love and that support from their family at such desperately difficult times, that's when families walk away.
It's almost like a double whammy. When you're really needing that help and that support, which you do on an ongoing basis, naturally the first people that you would turn to are those closest to you, those that you grew up with, your blood relation. But they're just not there, they're not available.
12 individuals listened to the story of my life that, I hadn't told many people. And they proved them guilty.
In 2011, Candace Conte took the Jehovah's Witnesses to court. In California, a judge awarded her a $28 million verdict after it was shown that the organization told no one that her abuser had a previous conviction for child abuse.
Child abuse is not an epidemic, it's a pandemic, it's everywhere. So what can we do to bring the transparency to these organizations to achieve a goal of protecting children? But it's also kind of opened the door for what reforms can we go into now? You know, what can we do now?
People listening to this who may have their own experiences and may be contemplating going to authorities, when the stakes appear from the inside to be so high, what's your advice to people?
Be strong and have courage. It's terrible what happened to you. It's terrible. But think about the children that don't have protection, you know, because you lived through it. So be strong and have courage and try to stand up. And it's tough, it's hard. But the only way that we're going to get change is if you have a voice. So have a voice.
Witness Protection was produced and presented by me, David Cook, for Heart and Soul from the BBC World Service. If you enjoyed this podcast, you may also enjoy similar powerful personal stories from Outlook. Go to bbc.co.uk/World Service and search for the Outlook programme pages.